In this episode of Heretical Heathenry, I'm tackling one of the most controversial topics in all of Germanic paganism, working with the Jotun, specifically Loki, but really all of them. I'm going to talk about why worshipping chaos invites chaos into your life, what I've observed happening to people who worship these entities, and why it's not gatekeeping. It's basic spiritual hygiene. This episode contains strong opinions and frank discussions about mental health and spiritual practice. If you're a Lokian, you're probably already getting defensive. That's fine, but hear me out, because thousands of years of wisdom traditions can't all be wrong about this. With that said, let's get into it. So I made a lot of claims in my introductory episode that I'm sure would rub a lot of people the wrong way, and like a decade from now when they dig this up and they have problems with it, I probably still won't apologize. So I thought, why not tackle one of the most controversial topics in all of heathenry right now, working with the Jotun. You know, those silly little giants, those ferocious forces of chaos. And specifically, let's talk about why I don't do it, and why I think you shouldn't either. These days Loki and his kin are very popular, and for good reason. The Western world, much like the Titanic, has been slowly veering towards Ragnarok for the past few decades, and many of the younger generations missed the boat. There is no escape here. Gone are the days when a man could own a home and provide for his family on a single income. We live in a world where a single bedroom apartment is well over $1,000 a month. And in some areas, even in like the backwoods, rural Wisconsin areas that I live in, they're upwards of like $1,200 a month. Sometimes you're paying up to $800 for a bedroom, excuse me. And social media, along with dating apps, have destroyed the sacred social connections that made room for young people to properly connect. So why not turn to the Jotnar? Why not sit back and let the world just burn around you? And I'm sure this topic's going to make a lot of people uncomfortable. If you're a Lokian or you work with other Jotun, then you're probably already getting defensive, and I get it. But hear me out, because I'm not judging you personally. Well, I kinda am. Wisdom traditions going back thousands of years have warned us about the dangers of this kind of thing, and we shouldn't ignore thousands of years of human wisdom in an attempt to be inclusive or destroy the system. I've been doing the spiritual thing for a while, and I even studied philosophy and religion at university, which may sound impressive at first glance, credentials and all, but trust me, it really isn't. An education in philosophy focuses on propositions and logic. It teaches you to think beyond the current cultural boundaries of the constant cascade at the end of time, which might sound great for an episode on Loki, but not in the way you might think. More on that later. For now, I want to focus on the Loki thing. All over the heathen net, in the darkest corners of the deepest dungeons of Reddit and the human dregs that is TikTok, you will see many people recounting stories of Loki worship. Many claim that Loki has personally helped them make it through the hard times. Tales are whispered of the Lokian spirit making room for change and growth, his fiery spirit burning down obstacles as though he was the high flame himself. Yet, despite all the supposed room for growth created by Loki, their lot in life never seems to improve. Year after year they cease to evolve, and those who don't evolve eventually stagnate. There's something both spiritually and physically corrosive about following the path of the Jotnar. As an experiment, take a moment and conjure to mind what you think a follower of Loki would look like. Just take a moment. Yep, you guessed right. That's what they look like. They often seem normal at first, but over time their wardrobe gets darker and darker. They shave half their head, and then brightly color what's left as if they're like a poisonous snake in the jungle. They get tattoos that look like doodles on a high school desk, and they press pronouns deep into their piercings. It's as though their appearance takes on a monstrous form to match the forces of chaos they orient themselves around. Followers of the Jotun also seem to suffer a host of mental troubles, and rather than doing the work to make changes in their mental health, they actively boast about their mental illnesses as if being able to barely function as a useful person is worthy of renown. So when someone claims Loki is just misunderstood, or they claim that Loki has helped them, perhaps it's best that we just be cautious. Something that I've learned to be true the longer I've been exposed to this world of woo, a rule not discussed in the pagan world that much, and it's pretty simple. You become what you worship. Not in some abstract, metaphorical sense. I mean this literally. The The beings you give your devotion to, the forces you invoke, the entities you build relationships with, they shape you. They influence your thoughts, your behaviors, and your life circumstances. And this isn't like an idea that's unique to me, right? You'll see this across religious traditions from Hinduism to Buddhism, and even in some schools of Christianity. Some go as far as to claim that you take on the physical appearance of a given deity you choose to worship. I listen to a lot of stuff at Spotify. I listen to a lot of stuff on Spotify at work. And one of the things I like to listen to is a gentleman named Ranveer. And I think his channel is called Beer Biceps. I think he started his fitness and then he's slowly been getting into Hinduism over time. But he has a guest on there whose name I won't try to pronounce because I will mess it up. I promise I will. He was one of the first people who introduced me to this idea that when you worship certain Hindu gods, you take on their appearances. And some won't even bless you in the name of the gods, right? Because they think that, like, there's some cases where the god's power moving through you will even aid you over time. So they will say, I hope things go well. It's interesting to see this idea occurring in the East and in the West. In the Western sphere, I've seen that idea come from Jonathan Peugeot. And I know Christians tend to worry about everything, a fearmonger about everything, but he's at least right here when he says that, like, what you aim at is the thing you kind of turn into. But all of this is to say, when you worship chaos, you invite chaos into your life. When you give devotion to beings whose nature is destructive, disillusion, and disorder, you shouldn't be surprised when your life and your appearance starts to reflect those qualities. It's like standing in the rain and being surprised when you get wet. The Jotun are forces of chaos. That's not a value judgment that I'm imposing on them. It's not a social construct. That's what they are in the cosmology. They're the forces that oppose order, that seek to tear down what's been built. They're the forces that exist in opposition to the gods who create and maintain structure. And yes, I'm aware the lore is a little bit more complicated than that, and I'll get to that, but fundamentally, the Jotun do represent chaos. Now, Loki is obviously the flashpoint here because he's the most popular Jotun in modern practice, mostly because of Marvel. I imagine when most people think of Loki, they think of that actor, Tom Hiddleston. I'm really bad at actors' names. I'm so out of touch. I am turning into an old man. But people love Loki. And as I said, they'll tell you that Loki has helped them. He's been there for them. And my personal favorite, he's just misunderstood, or he's a fire spirit. Some claim he's a trickster who represents queer identity or neurodivergence or whatever marginalized aspect they identify with, because he becomes like a lady horse and then sleeps with a mare. Maybe we should rethink our queer icons, folks. Loki is explicitly called out in the lore as the one who will lead the forces of chaos against the gods at Ragnarok. He's the father of Fenrir, the wolf who eventually devours Odin. He's the father of the Midgard serpent. He causes Baldur's death through deception and manipulation. Yes, he's a blood brother to Odin. Yes, he's helped the gods in the past, at least in some stories. But his true nature, his ultimate trajectory, is toward the destruction of order. So just because an entity responds to you doesn't mean it's good for you to worship that entity. And it's sort of interesting, right? Because if I want to bring this up about Loki and about the Jotun in general, people instantly go to Christianity. They want to say, oh, you're bringing your Christian baggage into paganism. But if you look over to the East, Buddhists have demons. They have like chthonic entities. You look to Hinduism, they have the same thing. I can't remember the name. I don't know. I think is it Ashuras? It might be Ashuras. Don't quote me on that. Go look it up for yourselves. And even in the lore, in like Lokasana, right? Loki shows up to a party he wasn't invited to. First thing he does is kill people outside. And then he goes in and instantly starts breaking up the frith. He starts either airing out personal laundry that he shouldn't be doing publicly, or he's just making up stories to cause problems. And we all know what this archetype is like, right? Like, we've all been to family gatherings and have that one family member who just for some reason can't relax. They have to call everyone out, they have to cause a big scene. That's Loki. Why would you ever want to invite that energy into your life? When you worship Loki, you're aligning yourself with that trajectory. You're inviting that energy into your life. And you might feel like it's liberating at first. Chaos feels great. The freedom feels great when you're stuck in rigid structures. But chaos doesn't stop when it's broken down. That which needed to break in the first place. It keeps going. It breaks everything. One of the things that actually got me into spirituality too is the work of Carl Jung. If you're not familiar, Carl Jung was a Swedish psychologist. I think he was around in the 20s. But he did a lot of his work on images and the subconscious and the kind of images that appear. And so there's sort of this thought, right, that like maybe what's going on isn't actually that you're attracted to things like Loki. Maybe what's going on is that Loki is like a message coming up from either your subconscious or the collective subconscious to let us know we're off the tracks, folks. Like the trickster shows up because we're not following the psychopomp. It's an image there to let you know you're on the wrong path and you need to do some course correction. And there was a sense that like I was attracted to this energy for quite a few years, but if you look back, sure, those years were fun. I was going out a lot, I was doing drugs, I was drinking all the time, I was getting with multiple women. I was a mess. I ended up in the ER a few times from some of those things that I did. And as soon as I started getting things in order, a different image appeared, right? Like an Odin or like a Tyr or like a Thor archetype appears from the subconscious, and it's like, look, this thing now is where we need to be aiming. This is where we need to be going. And it's right, I feel like 1,000% better. So that's just something to consider in going forward. Think that like maybe the image of Loki coming up that you think you're attracted to might actually be a warning from other parts of you. And this is where I want to specifically talk about some mental health issues, because this is where I see the most damage happening in real time. I've watched people with depression, anxiety, and bipolar disorder, the people who are already struggling with internal chaos, take up Loki or some other Jotun that vibes with them. And I've watched their lives fall apart, kind of like mine did. It's not because some social oppression or whatever nonsense you reach out for to justify your experience. It's because you're feeding the very forces that are already destabilizing you. If you're someone whose mind already tends toward chaos, you have racing thoughts, emotional volatility, and destructive patterns, the last thing you need to do is invite more chaos into your spiritual life. You need order, you need structure. You need to fix your aims on beings who represent stability, boundaries, and clarity of mind. And probably cold showers. Yeah, definitely cold showers. I can already hear Reddit trolls screeching something about ableism or gatekeeping, and that's fine. Gatekeeping is a necessary tool for a functional life or any kind of organization to move in harmony. We tried the whole everyone's included for everything all the time for over a decade. It doesn't work. It's a stupid, corrosive idea that destroyed everything it touched, and it won't stop. If you're someone hearing this and it causes like a visceral emotional reaction, then it's something that you desperately need to hear. There's something in your psyche that's in desperate need of attention and integration. It could even be a sign of astral parasites recognizing a threat to their loosh farm, but I'm far from the guy to ask about that. There's a reason we tell people with addiction issues to avoid certain environments and social circles. It's basic harm reduction. If you're someone struggling with alcohol addiction, then you don't hang out in bars. Likewise, if you're struggling with mental chaos, then you don't worship the embodiment of chaos. Again, I know some people will say that Loki helped me cope with my mental illness, and maybe that's true in the short term. Maybe the permission to be chaotic, to stop trying so hard to hold it together, felt like a real relief. But I'd ask, where are you 5 years later? Are you more stable? More grounded? Better able to function? Or are you just more comfortable in the chaos? And does the thought of getting your life together make you feel uncomfortable? The beings we worship shape us over time. They don't just comfort us in the moment, they mold us into their image. And if you worship chaos long enough, you become chaos. Your relationships become chaotic. Your work life becomes chaotic. Your mind becomes more chaotic. This isn't what healing looks like, folks. And unless you're a practitioner of a tantric path, or just a left-hand path in general, it's not what religion looks like either. Now here's where maybe I should add a little bit of nuance because the lore isn't quite as simple as gods good, giants bad. The gods have a complex relationship with the Jotun. Thor's mother, Jord, is a giantess. Freyr marries Gerd, a Jotun woman. Odin himself seeks wisdom from the giants. He has relationships with them. So clearly, the gods don't see this as a simple binary. And I think, well, there's something real and true to that idea, and it's something I've seen in Buddhist thinkers. Beings can evolve. They can sort of move up the chain of being, to use a Platonic analogy. Some Jotuns seem to be capable of redemption, of alignment with order rather than chaos. Gerd becomes part of the divine family through marriage to Freyr. Skadi follows the same pattern in her marriage to Njordr. And some gods give wisdom rather than seek destruction. However, and this is crucial, the relationships are between the gods and the Jotun, not between us and the Jotun. The gods have the power, the standing, and the divine authority to negotiate with the Jotun, with the chaos, to form alliances, to marry into giant kind. We just don't. It's like the difference between a trained diplomat who can negotiate with hostile powers and a random civilian who tries to do the same. The diplomat has backing, he has the authority, resources, and the training. The civilian is just a babbling fool facing down a dangerous situation. The sources give us this nice metaphor of marriage. The gods can marry Jotun because they have the power to bring them into right relationship, to uplift lower beings to the halls of Asgard. We mortals don't have that standing. Or at least I'm not sure we do. Maybe with enough prayer and the right offerings, our efforts can play a role in the redemption of a Jotun, which again is a Buddhist idea. But this goes beyond my understanding, and I haven't seen anyone else other than me in the Norse pagan sphere talk about this. What I do know is that people who try to form relationships with the Jotun their lives get worse. They're clearly taking advantage of our hospitality. And here's the other problem. We don't have clear ways to distinguish which Jotun are redeemable and which are fundamentally destructive. The lore doesn't give us a neat taxonomy. So even if the Jotun could potentially be worked with safely, how do you know which ones? How do you know you're not inviting Fenrir into life when you think you're working with a benevolent earth giant? And if you're providing offerings to Fenrir, what makes you think you can tame him? I think there's probably also another conversation we could have about the fact that we reduce all of the forces in nature, all of the multiplicity of spirits, all of the otherness, down to specific names that appeared in specific texts that like a Christian Icelander wrote. And I know he was alive at pagan times, but you get my meaning. It's like maybe there are other striker spirits, there are other sort of like wandering wizard spirits around you, and those aren't Thor and Odin. Those have their own personal names. The wise path, the safe path to focus on, is to worship the gods of order, on the Aesir and the Vanir, who maintain and protect. Leave complex negotiations with chaos to those who have the power to handle it. So inevitably someone's going to say that this is gatekeeping, that I'm telling people they can't practice how they want, that I'm excluding people, or that I'm being judgmental. And in some cases you're right. But we can't go on allowing people to do whatever they want. Absolute freedom to destroy oneself isn't good for the folk, isn't good for a country. We need to be better. We need standards. We need to nut up and tell people that they can't do what's dangerous even if they want to. At least in some cases. At the end of the day, you can do whatever you want. I'm not running around reporting Lokian accounts or trying to get people kicked out of communities. Your practice is your own. If religions across time and continent think worshipping chaos is harmful, then maybe we should be hesitant when walking that path. I've personally never seen it go well. You can disagree, you can decide taking the risk is worth it for you, but let's at least be honest about what we're doing. If you're going to worship the Jotun, own to the fact that you're aligning yourself with chaos. Don't pretend it's the same thing as worshipping the gods. Don't act like there's no difference between Odin and Loki or Thor and Fenrir. And especially if you're someone who's already struggling with mental health, with stability, with keeping your life together, really think about whether inviting more chaos is what you need. Not that that feels exciting or liberating in the moment, but what's actually going to help you build and sustain a healthy life. Look, I know this episode is going to piss some people off. That's fine. I'm not here to make everyone comfortable. Heretical is in the name. I'm here to ask questions that need to be asked, and to share what I've learned through my practice and observation, and through the cross-cultural studies and some of the magical practices that I engage in. You become what you worship. That's the core of it. Choose carefully what you align yourself with, because it will shape you whether you intended to or not. Now, I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on this. You can find me on social media, Heretical Heathenry on X, or my Substack, also by Heretical Heathenry, if you want to continue this conversation. I'm Robert Knox, this is Heretical Heathenry, and I'll talk to you next time.